Everything looked perfect up to a certain point, but something very dark was hiding inside. And when the truth came out, I couldn't stop it. Find out how everything turned out at the end of the story. The envelope looked too elegant to be junk. Navy blue, thick as cardstock, with a silver seal that shimmered under kitchen lights. Kate had left it half buried beneath a grocery list on the counter, like it was nothing. I spotted it after dinner, while cleaning up. It wasn't addressed to me, but my name was on the return address label. That was the first clue that something was off. Inside was a letter from something called the RMCF, short for the Remiel Medical Compatibility Foundation. I'd heard of them before in clinical data circles. Private, selective, the kind of group that studied desire like a virus. The letter congratulated the recipient on their acceptance into an intimate dynamics experiment and detailed psychological compatibility metrics. Emotional resonance, cognitive alignment, sexual rhythm. At the bottom were two names paired together. One of them was Kate, the other wasn't mine. I asked her about it. She didn't even blink. Spam, she said, pouring wine without looking at me. Some data scraping scam, probably. But I knew better. I've spent my life studying language and intent, buried inside NLP systems that can smell deceit in a comma. Her reply had all the shape of truth, but none of the tremor. A real mistake sounds messy. That was clean. Too clean, like someone running a script. That night, while she slept, I drove to my lab with the envelope in my bag. I didn't turn on the lights, just fired up the system and scanned the text into my analysis grid. Within 20 minutes, I had answers. The female responses on the test, those were hers, no question. The sentence structure, punctuation rhythm, lexical choice, it was Kate through and through. But the male half, it didn't belong to me. It matched someone else, a student from my seminar class, Liam. His writing style was aggressive in the way insecure people write when they think they're being profound. Overuse of present tense, sparse qualifiers, same weird affinity for Freudian references. Then it hit me. 6 months ago, Liam had given Kate a copy of The Interpretation of Dreams. He handed it to her after a lecture. She'd laughed at the gift, called it pretentious, and tossed it on the living room shelf, but she hadn't thrown it away. That night, I pulled it down. Inside the cover was a note. While your husband analyzes data, I'm learning to read you. See you Thursday. I remember reading it with the kind of stillness that comes from holding in rage. It wasn't just betrayal, it was arrogance. But I didn't confront her, not yet. I'd spent too long studying behavioral patterns to walk in blind. I needed control. So I called in a favor from someone who understood pressure, Martin Velez, a negotiation expert I once worked with during a military adjunct project. He had a gift for extracting truth without force. Together, we began building something new. We designed a retreat, a fake one, complete with brochures, a sign-up site, and fake testimonials. We named it the Empathic Immersion, a getaway for couples seeking deep mutual decoding. The premise was innocent, emotional simulation through role reversal. Kate loved the idea. She called it a sexy kind of therapy. I told her I agreed. 3 weeks later, we landed in Colorado. The retreat cabin was wrapped in frost and pine trees. It looked peaceful, controlled, perfect. On the second day, during a session called Mirrored Desires, Martin led us through partner switching exercises. The goal, speak as your partner, think like them, channel their voice. Kate was brilliant at this. She always loved acting more than feeling. But Martin wasn't playing. Every prompt he gave was a cognitive trap laid in stages, designed to make her speak what she hadn't meant to. And she did. When Martin asked, "What does your partner fail to understand about your emotional needs?" Kate, playing me, said without pause, "It hurts that you still don't even know his scent." She froze after that, like the words surprised her more than they shocked the room. Her face paled, her mouth opened just a little. That was the moment she realized the slip. But I didn't say anything. I just looked at her and nodded, like she'd done well. She thought she'd walked into a retreat. She hadn't. She'd walked onto a stage I had built, down to the floorboards. The game had changed now. I wasn't suspicious anymore. I was hunting. After the retreat, Kate acted normal. Too normal. She made French toast on a Wednesday, something she hadn't done since before the pandemic. She started humming again, leaving half-sung lines of old jazz songs in the kitchen air. But I could see it in the way she stirred her coffee. The rhythm was off, slower, measured. She knew something had cracked, but she couldn't see how deep. That terrified her and thrilled me. And I didn't change a thing either. I kissed her the same way, said the same bedtime things. But when she turned out the light, I stayed awake and built plans in my mind. I wasn't going to confront her because confrontation would let her frame the story. This had to be precise, cold, almost surgical. I needed her to cross the line in a way that even she couldn't rationalize. To do that, I had to build the man she couldn't resist. Not Liam. He was amateur hour. Kate had a pattern. Her past flings all fit a strange mold. I started pulling data from her old social profiles, her deleted emails, even cached messages I recovered from cloud backups she didn't know I still had access to. I mapped every conversation she'd ever had with the men she hid from me. There were common traits. All of them deferred to her. They were clever but insecure, curious but indecisive. Men who fed her need for control but never pushed back. I realized she wasn't attracted to power. She was addicted to shaping it. She loved men she could sculpt, ones who admired her while letting her lead. So I created someone she couldn't mold. I called him Mason. He wasn't real, not in the way most people think of it. Mason was a curated ghost built from shadows. I hired an actor to play him, a quiet, unshaven artist with a sculptor's hands and a calm way of holding eye contact just a beat too long. His name was Luke. I met him through Martin, who had used him before in psychological field tests. Luke could slide into character like breath into a flute. I told him everything. Kate's triggers, her gestures, her conversational tactics. We practiced her speech patterns. I gave him notebooks filled with details, her favorite phrases, the way her voice tightened when she lied. Luke studied her like a part he was born to play. Their first meeting wasn't an accident. I staged it in a gallery she liked, the kind that smelled of iron and paint. Luke bumped into her while examining an abstract sculpture shaped like a twisted heart. He let her speak first, let her lead, and then he challenged her gently on something she said about emotional permanence. She smiled the way she always does when someone surprises her. Hooked. By the third meeting, she left him a key, my key, to my studio, the one she used to call your little tech cave. She hadn't been in it for months. Now suddenly it was where she wanted to breathe again. I watched through a silent lens as she walked in on a Friday, hair tied up, minimal makeup, the look she used to wear for me when she still cared. She brought wine. They kissed. It was all there. The slow, inevitable fall she convinced herself she was resisting. And this time, I wasn't on the outside. While they were tangled in each other beneath the frame lights, I was across town preparing the opening night of an exhibit, a single-title show hosted in an underground venue funded by one of my old AI partners. The event was exclusive, mysterious, invite only. The gallery space was minimal, like a chapel. Stark white walls, dark floors, and in the center, 13 installations. Each one was a fragment of Kate's life. Photos, text messages, journal entries she thought were private, clips from surveillance footage, all anonymized through filters and layered into surreal, painterly composites. One image showed her in bed, reading Liam's note. Another was a rendering of her laughing at a dinner with Mason. But the centerpiece was the most haunting. It was a life-size projection of her face, cut together from old videos, whispering lines she'd once said in therapy recordings. I just want to be seen without being decoded. Above that, glowing letters read, "The woman who lived with 3 men." Kate showed up on opening night wearing heels and hope. She thought she was coming to support Luke, whom she believed was debuting a series about the evolving female gaze. What she walked into was her own confession, reframed as art. She moved through the exhibit slowly at first, confused, and then faster, panic blooming in her throat. People around her whispered. Some pointed. A few even clapped, thinking it was performance art. She kept walking until she saw the final wall, where her name wasn't shown, but everything about her was there, etched into every frame. At the end was a light box with the final phrase, "A lie that breathes with your voice." She ran. I didn't chase her. That was never the plan. I stayed in the back, hidden behind the velvet curtain, watching the crowd swirl around her ghost. No one knew she was the subject. No one needed to. Her story had already told itself. She didn't come home that night. When she finally returned 3 days later, there was no anger in her face, just distance. A woman trying to find the edges of her own reflection in a house that no longer recognized her. And by then, I had already begun erasing my presence, one shared account at a time. The silence that followed the gallery was louder than anything I'd heard from her before. Kate didn't ask questions, didn't offer lies, didn't even speak my name for 3 days. She moved around the house like a guest in a hotel room she didn't remember checking into. I watched her from the corner of my eye as she paced hallways she once ruled, now shrinking into the floor beneath her heels. Every object had changed meaning. The photographs on the wall weren't memories anymore, just surveillance she hadn't noticed until it was too late. She tried to reset. That was her instinct. Pretend the exhibit was a misunderstanding, that Mason was a mistake she could undo, that the show was art, not evidence. I let her believe that for a while. I even left her a handwritten note, short, precise, left on her pillow. "You'll know the truth when you stop trying to explain it." Her first response was desperation, masquerading as confidence. She went back to Luke's studio, but it was empty. His number disconnected. His Instagram wiped. No trace of the man she gave herself to remained. Only a single post left behind, a photo of an unmade bed and a caption, "Every act of love is also an act of erasure." It broke her composure. She came home drunk that night, staggering into the kitchen, slamming cabinets like that sound could drown out her own unraveling. I stayed in the living room, reading, acting like I hadn't heard. She screamed something from the hallway, words meant to hurt, but dull like a spoon instead of a knife. I didn't respond. I just let the silence speak for me. And in that silence, she cracked. By the end of the week, she was calling her father for advice. I only knew because I'd redirected her phone metadata to my secure server. Their conversation was clipped, cold. Her father asked about the apartment. She hesitated before answering. That was when I knew she didn't realize what had already happened. I'd sold it. Well, technically, Mason had. Months ago, I began the legal process under his name, using proxies, shellcore, just enough digital laundering to keep it invisible until the final papers transferred. The deed now belonged to a corporate holding with her father listed as beneficiary. A trick, yes, but a legal one. She was living in a place she didn't own anymore, and the man she thought she betrayed me for had never existed. It got worse from there. I started pulling back in layers. The bank account we shared? Gone. The joint credit card? Closed. Her login to our insurance profile? Reset. And every time she tried to reset the password, she got a prompt asking her to verify the name of her first sin. The answer, of course, was Liam. She didn't take the hint. She took a knife to the bathroom mirror instead, shattered it across the floor in a fury that spilled down her arms. I didn't bandage her cuts. I handed her a towel, wordless, and went back to reading. Her blood on the marble didn't look like grief. It looked like a woman who had finally seen herself and hated the reflection. But she wasn't done lying. Not yet. She tried to call Liam again, tried to reach out through one of the university forums where his account still sat idle, untouched since the night I pulled every trace of him offline. She even posted on a relationship advice thread, under a fake name of course, asking vague questions about emotional confusion after artistic betrayal. I knew it was her immediately. Her phrasing never changed. She still clung to long metaphors, emotional euphemisms that reeked of guilt in pastel tones. So I replied, not as myself, as Mason. One account, one comment, just 7 words. "You were never the woman I painted." That was when the paranoia took hold. She began scouring through drawers, files, browser histories, searching for the edges of what she thought was still real. She started sleeping with the lights on, kept her laptop under her pillow, whispered to herself when she thought I couldn't hear. She was trying to remember which parts of her life were hers and which had been curated. She didn't realize that the answer was simple. None of it. I had turned every room into a museum, every word she said into an artifact. The studio? Bugged. The car? GPS tracked. Her music playlists had hidden files in the metadata, recordings of conversations she thought happened in private. Her calendar would occasionally send her invites from accounts she didn't recognize, each titled with a fragment from her own journals. Why do I keep choosing mirrors instead of men? He watches me even when I'm not there. I miss being known without being seen. They weren't just quotes. They were confessions. And I was building something with them. A second exhibit. This one wouldn't be public. It wouldn't have an audience. It would live in a space she couldn't touch. In the walls of her mind, in the doubt now growing like mold in her every decision. Every time she opened a drawer, she wondered if it had been rearranged. Every song on the radio seemed like a message. Every stranger's glance felt like a test. She'd wake up in cold sweats and wander through the apartment barefoot, whispering Mason's name like it could anchor her back to something real. She still didn't know I was behind it. She thought Mason was the mastermind, thought he'd tricked her, used her. She thought she'd been manipulated by a brilliant fraud. And in a way she had, but not in the way she imagined, because Mason never existed. But I did, still right there, still sharing the same space, still the husband she swore she'd never betray. Watching her come undone, one breath at a time, in the home she thought she owned. And we hadn't even reached the breaking point yet. At some point, Kate must have realized she couldn't reclaim control inside the walls of that apartment. I watched the signs appear slowly, like symptoms of a disease she couldn't admit to having. She stopped sleeping altogether, stopped answering emails. One night I came home to find her perched at the edge of the bed, bags packed, laptop open to a bus route schedule. Her hair was a mess, her hands shaking slightly. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The message was clear. She was going to run. But I didn't stop her. That would have given her power, the illusion that escape was possible. Instead, I kissed her on the temple, helped her zip the last bag shut, and said, "Maybe a little distance will help." She blinked at me like I'd turned into a stranger overnight. I almost laughed at the irony. She left 2 hours later. I watched her go from the building's security feed, pixelated and cold in grayscale. I waited until her bus pulled out of the station, and then I followed. Not physically, I didn't have to. She carried me in every device she brought. Her phone was cloned, her laptop mirrored. Her login history beamed directly to my offshore server the moment she turned it on. I knew where she stayed, what she ate, which journal file she opened first. She thought she was escaping into solitude, but all she did was step into another exhibit. She took a room in a remote guest house 2 towns over. Wooden, quiet, the kind of place marketed to people who pretend they're healing. She spent the first day offline, trying to reset. She even burned a stack of old notebooks behind the cabin, as if that could erase the past. But she wasn't burning history. She was feeding mine. Because every entry she thought she destroyed, I already had. Every word, every list, every phrase she'd once scribbled in tears or rage. They were archived in a hidden digital vault she didn't know existed. Even the matches she used to light the fire came from a box I planted 6 months ago. She couldn't even erase herself without my help. On the 3rd day, she tried to fight back. She posted something to a private forum for women recovering from emotional manipulation. A sob story crafted carefully about a husband who used language like a weapon, who monitored every move, who twisted reality into performance. She begged for help in poetic language, painting herself as the abused, the unseen. I waited a full day before replying. Under a pseudonym, I sent a reply that dissected her entire story, line by line, not with accusations, with empathy. I quoted studies, linked to research, gently offered the possibility that her guilt was causing hallucinated victimhood, that her need to feel pursued had turned into paranoia. The others in the thread sided with me. By the next day, she deleted the post. Then she tried to contact a lawyer. I let the call go through until she reached the receptionist. Then I triggered a call forward reroute. She was never talking to a law office. She was talking to Martin, playing a paralegal. He told her they'd look into things and asked her to send over digital copies of anything she wanted included in her case. She uploaded 15 files. All of them became mine. She had no idea she was building her own prosecution exhibit. After a week, her mental state began to crack in more visible ways. Her journal entries grew erratic. She began skipping meals, talking to herself. There was one file she opened every night, the audio meditation I left buried in her downloads folder under the name breathe.mp3. It was my voice, masked and distorted, repeating a single phrase in different cadences. Truth isn't lost, it's taken. And still, she kept listening. Back in the city, I started tightening the last threads. The lease on her name was revoked. Her former job, where she'd been quietly switching departments to be closer to Liam, had been flooded with anonymous tips, backed by digital evidence of inappropriate conduct. She was called in for questioning over a Zoom call. She showed up disheveled, distracted, and unsure of what she was even being accused of. She broke down on camera. They gave her a leave of absence, indefinite, unpaid. From the outside, her life still looked intact, but she had no keys, no income, no one she could trust. I was still technically her husband, still legally in her life, but invisible in every way she needed me to be gone. I had become a ghost in reverse, not dead, but so completely present in her shadows that she couldn't prove I was there. She returned to the city after 10 days. She said nothing to me when she walked in, just dropped her bag at the door and sat on the couch. Her eyes were bloodshot, her nails bitten to the quick. I handed her a glass of water. She took it with both hands like a child and sipped in silence. For a full hour, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered something so faint, I almost missed it. Do you ever feel like you're not the one living your life? I didn't answer. She didn't repeat it. We just sat there, the distance between us pulsing like a second heartbeat in the room. That night, she fell asleep on the floor in the hallway. I left her there. I didn't cover her with a blanket, didn't tuck her in, just let the cold seep in through the hardwood while I stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker like warning signals. Something in her had started to bend, but it hadn't snapped yet. That would come soon. She still thought she was suffering from guilt. She didn't understand that guilt was only the beginning. What I had built for her wasn't revenge. It was revelation. And the mirror she was staring into? It hadn't even started showing her the real reflection yet. By early November, the apartment felt like a movie set after filming wrapped. Everything still in place, but lifeless, staged. Kate wandered from room to room like she didn't recognize any of it. She kept looking over her shoulder. I didn't need to say anything anymore. The silence was doing the work for me. She tried to rebuild order, morning jogs, tea in the afternoon, daily journaling, but none of it stuck. The rhythm slipped through her hands like water. Then she got the voicemail I planted. My voice altered, reading from one of her old diary entries she thought was gone. It ended with that one line. I don't think he sees me anymore. She froze. I watched her try to process it. She didn't call me out. She didn't scream. She just stood there with the phone in her hand like it had betrayed her. Then came the fake journal I left on the hallway table. Leather-bound, handwritten pages in her exact style. It wasn't hers, but every sentence read like her soul. Thoughts she'd had but never said aloud. Memories that felt real but weren't. She read it all, front to back, in one sitting. And then I started sending emails. From her, to fake addresses, drafted in her tone, confessions she didn't remember writing, requests to Mason, apologies to Liam, flirtation, regret, fear. Each one time-stamped, believable. She scrolled through her sent folder over and over, deleting everything, staring at the trash bin like it might explode. Reality was bending, and she knew it. Next came the webcam. She installed it herself, a desperate attempt to catch me, or whatever she thought was happening, while she slept. But every night the footage glitched, corrupted files, a black screen, until one night it finally worked. She watched herself get up at 2:17 a.m., walk toward the camera, stare directly into it, and whisper, I see you seeing me. She didn't sleep for 2 nights after that. The breakdown was coming fast now. At a cafe, she accused the barista of tampering with her drink. A stranger filmed it. The video went viral for a minute, titled "Woman Loses It Over Coffee Order." I made sure she saw it the next day. That night, she dragged a blanket under the dining table and curled up there. I didn't ask. I just watched her disappear. Then I gave her one last push, a manuscript, printed and bound like a proof copy. The title read, "The Woman Who Left Without Knowing Why." No author, just a red ribbon around the middle. I left it on her pillow. She read the whole thing in one day. Inside, her life played out chapter by chapter. The invitation letter, the affair, Mason, the art show. It was all there. Everything she did, everything I did. On page 203, a single line stopped her. "You weren't seduced. You were edited." I saw something in her eyes crack permanently after that. She stopped asking questions, stopped fighting. She just folded, quietly, as if she finally understood she wasn't living a life anymore, just acting in one she hadn't written. She moved to the guest room, stopped calling friends, sat beside me in silence like we were two strangers waiting for a train. One night she reached for my hand, but stopped halfway. Her fingers hovered in the air like she wasn't sure they were hers. And I still hadn't finished the story. Because while she wrestled with what was left of herself, I was already writing the final page, the one she'd never see coming. Winter dropped hard that year, like the cold had been waiting for its cue. The apartment grew quieter, despite the creaks and groans of the old pipes. Kate barely left her room now. When she did, she walked like a guest on unfamiliar floors, unsure of which direction was safe. Her face looked thinner, but not from lack of food. It was like something underneath had been scraped away. She no longer asked where Mason was, no longer brought up the emails or the video or the manuscript. The questions had burned out, leaving only smoke. She stopped fighting and started fading. That was what I needed, because the final turn in this story wasn't going to be about fire. It was going to be about absence. I made myself less visible, left earlier for work, came home later, spoke less, ate alone, and I watched the tension in her eyes shift from guilt to confusion, then to something worse, acceptance. She thought I had given up on her, that I was emotionally done. She didn't realize this was the quiet part of the storm, the inhale before the drop. She tried once to get close. It was a Thursday morning. She sat beside me on the edge of the couch and offered to make coffee. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. I looked at her, really looked, and saw the shell. The woman who once laughed at things she shouldn't, who danced barefoot in our hallway at midnight, that woman was gone. In her place was someone afraid to breathe too loud. I nodded. She didn't get up. She just sat there waiting for permission to exist. And I said nothing. 2 days later, she opened her laptop and found every trace of me erased. No browser history, no bookmarks, no emails. Our photos were gone, wiped. Even our shared playlists had been deleted, song by song. Her phone no longer connected to mine. She stared at the blank screen like it was mourning something. That night, she searched my name on Google. Nothing. Not even a LinkedIn profile. She asked if I'd changed jobs. I said, "Not really." She didn't press, because by then, she knew better. I'd been building the exit for months, a new identity, paper trails buried in government forms and academic databases. Seth Meyers was slowly vanishing, and in his place, Noah Venton was born, dual citizen, researcher in neurosomatic linguistics, based out of a small university in Iceland. I already had a faculty page, a fake department chair, even a short paper published in a Scandinavian journal under my new name. The work was solid, the story airtight. I started sleeping in a different apartment. She didn't know that, of course. I let her think I was still coming home late. But while she lay awake wondering if I'd finally stopped loving her, I was thousands of miles away in the system already. The government thought I was abroad. My mail was forwarded to a P.O. box I checked with gloves on. Then I staged the final event, a hiking expedition. Georgia, the country, not the state. Rugged terrain, communication dead zones, a week-long solo trek. I planted the blog posts ahead of time, uploaded trail maps, crafted a few scheduled posts to auto-update while I was gone, then a final scheduled entry. Weather's closing in fast, might turn back tomorrow. But there's something strange about the quiet up here. That was the last thing anyone ever heard from Seth. Kate found out the way I wanted her to. A call from a government contact, a concerned voicemail, then a knock at the door. She opened it to an empty hallway with a single envelope on the floor. Inside, my last known itinerary, a map with a red circle over a mountain ridge, and a death certificate. Presumed deceased, body not recovered. I watched her read it through a camera in the light fixture. She sat on the floor for almost an hour. Didn't cry, just sat there, like someone trying to figure out if the world was still real or just continuing without her. And then she started calling. Old friends, my colleagues, even Liam, whose number no longer existed. Everyone she reached out to gave her the same answer. We haven't heard from him. Sorry. No one questioned it, because I'd spent months erasing the parts of me she could prove, and the parts she could remember, those were becoming unreliable. I left one clue, a postcard. It arrived a week later. No return address, just a photo of Reykjavik in winter, the northern lights washing the sky in green. On the back, one line, "You had 3 chances, all burned." She read it again and again, hands shaking. I knew she would, because she needed closure. But closure was never part of the plan. And while she sat in the apartment alone, tracing my name through static and fragments, Noah Venton was already teaching his first lecture. My students were blind children, kids who listened better than anyone, who didn't need to see your face to know your heart. There was peace in that, something gentle, something clean. And maybe that's why I chose it, not to run, but to live in a place where the truth could only be heard, never seen. Kate was now trapped in a narrative that no longer had a narrator. No more actor, no more script. Just a woman in an empty house, haunted by her own choices. And soon, not even that. A year passed. She marked it on the wall like prisoners do. Sharp lines carved into the back of the hallway closet, where no one else would see. 64 scratches, one for each week since I disappeared. That was her ritual now. Not birthdays, not holidays. Just that quiet tally of silence. She'd stopped speaking to friends, let her hair grow out uneven, kept the lights low, and most of all, she'd stopped asking why, because she'd already begun answering herself. I watched her come undone from a distance, through things she didn't notice. Every so often, she'd receive a call with no sound, an empty envelope with nothing inside, a book recommendation from an online algorithm that led her back to a passage she once wrote in a secret blog she thought no one had ever read. In the space of my absence, she built her own mythology. She tried once to rebuild me digitally, scraped voice clips from old voicemails, used AI to generate a simulation. It spoke, almost like me, looked almost like me. But when it blinked without rhythm, she screamed, threw her laptop across the room. I saw the moment she realized that even in reconstruction, I could not be controlled. And then came the pregnancy. That was the moment everything she'd buried roared back through the floorboards. She found out during a routine visit, expecting nothing. The doctor was kind, professional. But when he asked about the father, she couldn't answer. The files were blank. Every partner she thought could be responsible had vanished. Mason was gone. Liam had never existed in the system. And me, I was a ghost in every database. When she called the clinic later to request another test, they told her the file had been locked by a signature she didn't recognize, one she'd seen once before. Noah Venton. That name followed her now like a curse. It showed up in strange places. The author of a neuroscience article in a magazine left on her bus seat, a name tag in a dream. Once she found it etched into the condensation on the bathroom mirror, before remembering that she hadn't used the mirror in months, because all the mirrors in the apartment were gone. I'd taken them, replaced them with blank panels, photos, shelves. Even the ones in her compact kits were shattered. It wasn't random. It was the last layer. She couldn't look at herself anymore, not without guessing whether the reflection was hers or something I'd left behind, because that was the point. I wanted her to feel exactly what I'd felt when I looked at her face the day I opened that envelope. Disbelief, confusion, shame. I mailed her one last package. No sender, no return address. Just a small velvet box with no inscription. Inside, a ring, not a wedding band. A cheap plastic toy ring, the kind from a vending machine, a nod to a moment from our past, one she likely didn't remember anymore. Back when she'd laughed and said she'd marry me even if I had nothing but a joke in my pocket, I did. She said yes anyway. Now she had the ring, but not the man. The box came with a note, just a single sentence, typed in small courier font. You never wanted me, you wanted an audience. That same day I sent her a copy of the novel again, but this time the ending had changed. It still told the story, the affair, the lies, the rewrites. But on the final page, it didn't end with her vanishing. It ended with her standing on a dark stage, alone, facing an invisible crowd. Her voice cracked as she whispered to no one, I am only your reflection. She dropped the book in the trash, dug it back out 5 minutes later. Couldn't help herself. She read that line again and again, like it might answer something. But nothing came. No closure, no clean cut. Just the soft echo of her own voice in a room with no mirrors. Meanwhile, I was in Iceland. Different name, different language, different air. The woman beside me wore her honesty like armor. She didn't ask about my past and I didn't volunteer it, because this part of me, Noah Venton, was born clean. Not innocent, but clean. Sometimes I dream about Kate, but not in anger. She's just a figure in the distance, standing in a field of glass, waiting for a reflection that never comes. She reaches out again and again to touch something, anything, but her hand passes through air. I never go to her. I just watch, because the story ended when she stopped writing it. Everything after that was just a reflection trapped in rewind, and she lives there now, in that room without mirrors, with every version of me she helped destroy, every version of herself she pretended was someone else's fault. There is no justice in this, only balance. No fire, no revenge. Just the cold echo of a woman who lost her audience. And the final line she'll never forget, even if no one's left to hear it. Let her burn. That's all for now, folks. Thank you for being with me today and listened. And if you liked my story, please subscribe, hit the like button, and comment below what you think about all this and what would you do if you were me. Also, don't forget to check my other stories in description below.